I came across a report from Salisbury, Wiltshire, and I think it highlights the wider problem that I'm going to be talking about here. Now, interesting thing is that usually when I'm thinking about this subject, I get very angry. That's my natural feeling. But to be honest, I'm almost drained of that right now. Excuse me, I've had my mouth's a bit dry. I had toad in the hole for dinner, so, right. Um, yeah, I'm actually uh in this case just beyond the point of anger because honestly you can get to the point where you hear this stuff so much that it just becomes um it just becomes draining to overthink it and to get depressed about it. But I do think it's important to consider um because this is happening. This is reality. This is happening in the society that we're in. So I'm not going to read out the whole report. It's a little bit, well, I just don't want to read the whole thing out, but it gives you an idea. I'll put a link in the video as always. Wheelchair user left with life-changing injuries after attack at Salisbury Cathedral. Gurgana Krusteva is the reporter. A man in a wheelchair has been left with life-changing injuries after an attack by a gang of thugs. CCTV footage showed a pair of four youths. Wiltshire police want to trace over the incident in front of Salisbury Cathedral. A man in his 30s and his friend who is in his 40s were subject to an abhorrent attack which took place on July the 19th, the hottest day of the year, shortly after 9 p.m. That was a warm evening, so I think the relevance there is that when you're under stress, the warm weather definitely exacerbates. It just does. I know that when you're angry or you're in pain, it exacerbates. The assault has left the disabled victim with serious injuries on his leg. PC Susan Elway said this was a sustained attack during which a vulnerable man has suffered serious injuries, have left him incredibly distressed. The incident happened in a public place with a number of members of the public believed to be witnesses. We have already obtained a number of witness accounts and we would continue to urge anyone with information to get in touch. I'll just read this out, it's not too long. Behaviour of this nature is completely abhorrent and will not be tolerated within our community. It all comes down to the sentencing, though. I mean, that's all. Look, of course, the police can say that, but it all comes down to what the sentence is, if it's tolerated or not. I know those living in Salisbury will be frustrated and upset by this incident. We would like to reassure residents that we are conducting a robust investigation to identify those involved. As part of their inquiries, detectives want to speak to those pictured in connection and are asking for the public's help in identifying them. The spokesman added both men sustained injuries, however, the victim who uses a wheelchair suffered potentially life changing injuries to his leg during the assault. The group of youths followed the pair into the high street and onto Crane Street. Um, it's not actually giving any numbers there for Wiltshire Police or any sort of information that could be available. If I can find that, I will, in the off chance that anyone of my subscribers is living in the Wiltshire area. But basically, the footage shows four youths, three boys, one girl. Um, the guy that looks like the ringleader because he's swaggering and he's sort of in the middle. He's wearing a blue top. There's something around his neck. They've all got shorts on, being a hot day. One of them has a grey hoodie. One of them's topless, like he's not wearing a t-shirt. He's got it draped over his back. The girl has like a cream colored top, and what looks like sunglasses on her head. Um, from those pictures, it looks like a thug in the blue t-shirt is the ringleader, the little shit. Um, so yeah, I hope they're hunted down. I hope they're identified, and I hope they're put behind bars. Um, Here's the thing: I'm a 36-year-old man. I'm not disabled, so I don't consider myself vulnerable in any way. But honestly, I'd be scared when I see large groups of teenagers precisely because of stuff like this. People might say, "Oh, but you're not vulnerable; they wouldn't attack you." This is the thing: these sort of feral teens are out of control. They're absolutely out of control in this country. Um, And I think a big part of that is pandering adults, enabling adults. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of reasons. The parenting, I definitely think is part of it. There's people who say, "Oh, you can't blame the parents in every case." Maybe not in every case, but I think in a lot of cases you can. Um, I know that there are parents out there who are at the wit's end. They know they have problem um, sons and daughters, and they probably are trying their level best to deal with it. But for every parent in that situation, there's others who don't care or who are setting a bad example or they won't take any responsibility. My little insert name won't do anything. Um, as a society, we cannot have a situation with vulnerable people like the guy in the wheelchair. And this is not to like pity him. It's because I'm sure he wouldn't want that. But the report says he was left clearly distressed. I'm sure his friend was distressed as well. Now those are they're grown men in their 30s and 40s, so it shows that. I mean, I think what that says is that these sort of offenders are emboldened. Now, this was in, I was going to say broad daylight. It was in the evening, but there was clearly CCTV there, so they weren't frightened of being identified. Um, but what would be absolutely unforgivable is if they just get a community sentence. It is very, very obvious that they would laugh at community sentence, literally. Now, I'm sick and tired of, sometimes they're called do-gooders. I think that's the wrong thing to ascribe them. There's nothing good about what they propose, which is basically the softly, softly approach. Oh, we need to understand them. We need to. It's because the youth clubs are closed, and they'll cook up all sorts of excuses. Look, I get it. If someone is growing up, let's say, with a mother who's a heroin addict and a father who's done time in jail and so on, clearly that is not going to be a good start. I get that. That's why I do say the root causes need to be tackled. But after the fact, there has to be justice. There has to be justice. And I have no patience or respect for people who advocate leniency for scum like this. I just don't. Um, I'm aware that there's a group called, I think they call themselves Jengba or something like that, because when I was looking up the Jack Woodley case, which happened here in Sunderland, um, like on social media, you see like the news feed, what's it called, the news feed on Facebook, and various things come up connected to what you're trying to find out. Um, and that came up. A woman associated with that group was saying it's awful that these children are being associated with the joint enterprise law, which I must admit I didn't even know existed. But what they seemed to be driving at was that because the rest of the gang didn't deliver the fatal blow to the young lad's head, then the rest are somehow innocent children. Let's look at the facts. A 15-year-old in this country, well, firstly, the age of criminal responsibility in England and Wales is 10. Whether you think that's too young or not, that is the age of criminal responsibility. In other words, anyone over that age is deemed to be knowledgeable about their own actions to be criminally liable. Now, that doesn't mean they'll be sent to an adult prison, but it means they're old enough to know right from wrong. Um, a 15-year-old can legally get a driving license. They can't drive until they're 17, if I've got that right, but they can legally get a driving license. A 16-year-old can legally have consensual sex, or it's the age of consent. Um, a 17-year-old can drive, and an 18-year-old could do anything. So when I hear teenage offenders like that being described as innocent children, I'm thinking, that's just astonishing. They're not children, they're teenagers. We need to make this clear differentiation between children and teenagers because I'm sick and tired of people defending hardened thugs. Believe me, a 16-year-old who's pumped up on drink or drugs or you name it, ego, can be very dangerous. And I'm a 36-year-old man. I'm relatively fit, strong. Um, 101, I believe I could handle myself, but nobody can take on a gang. I mean, I've seen reports of grown men who are, they're really physically fit, they're even bodybuilders and so on, even they can be left with serious injuries because real life isn't like a Hollywood film. It's not like that thing, what was it? Jack Reacher, if you've seen it with Tom Cruise, where he comes out of the bar and, he takes on a whole group of guys. And of course, there's all the lines between them, the smart lines, and it's very Hollywood. Good cinema, but it's not the real world. In the vast majority of cases, no matter how tough or brave you are, you can't take on a gang. Gangs are cards. It's no compliment to them. They're worthless cards in my opinion. But the practical side of it is you can't take on a group of people. Um, Maybe if you take out the ringleader, it could scare the others, but it's the way this works is, you focus on one, then the others pile in. They're like animals, and actually, animals attack and kill for survival. What we're seeing with so-called human beings um, is something malicious and evil. I think it's evil. The problem is, or the issue is, this case is by no means unique. This is happening all the time now. I think that laws certainly need to be hardened. I think the young offenders certainly, this thing about not named for legal reasons. I suspect it's probably something to do with the fact that they eventually need to be rehabilitated. Therefore, naming them will impair that. But that doesn't set about a good public image because it looks like it's protecting the criminal. But even if that's to stay in place, at least there should be much tougher sentences. A case like this absolutely should be mandatory jail sentences, nothing less. Um, I really think if you give them a community sentence, they'll laugh at it. I mean, you just have to look at the CCTV. It's not like they've got their hoods up and they're trying to run away. They're they're absolutely proud of what they've done. There may be varying levels to which they were culpable. One of them or two of them might claim they tried to stop the others based on that CCTV shot. I doubt it. I think the ringleader needs to put away for a long time. I'd love to see a little shit like that put into a scared straight program. Now, what I'm referring to in the States, they have a program in some jurisdictions called Scared Straight. This is controversial. Basically, it involves getting young offenders and sort of putting them in contact with hardened adult criminals for like a day. But there's always police officers there, so they'll never actually be in physical danger. The officers would intervene if that happened. But basically, those adult criminals get to yell in their face and scare the hell out of them. The idea being, if they're scared enough, it will force them to change. Because honestly, the softly approach that has been tried and tried and tried does not work. It doesn't work. All it does is embolden them. It makes them think they've got off the hook. They literally think that their age saves them. That needs to change. It needs to change. A 15-year-old thug who's going to attack a stranger for no reason needs to be scared straight. Now, the program itself has mixed success. In some cases, the young offenders continued with their ways, but in other cases, they did change for the better. So, what I say is let's look at the side of it, or let's look at what component of that was successful. And in those cases where they change for the better, why? I honestly think it should be at least considered, at the very least considered. Nothing should be taken off the table. We shouldn't say, "Oh, that would never work here." It shouldn't be taken off the table. But one thing that is absolutely true is the general public consensus is that people are utterly, utterly fed up with this. That's why the likes of those people who were campaigning against the joint enterprise law, they'll never get wider public support, thank goodness. They're dead wrong. As far as I'm concerned, they're enabling these sort of criminals. Because in the Jack Woodley case, it's not just that they were all there; they were actually laying into him. It's not just that one of them was engaged in the physical part; they were all beating him up. And so I say, put them all behind bars. Well, that's what's going to happen. Um, but of course, their parents are appealing it. You'd expect parents to do that, but I hope they fail. I hope they fail badly. And then maybe they should say, maybe I should have been a better parent. You know, instead of crying over their poor innocent children, maybe they should think, why did my son turn out to be a thug? They say that their sons were never in gangs, never carried knives. They're deluded because their sons were there that day. Um, None of them tried to stop it. Those are the facts. Now, if something emerges that says that one of them really had nothing to do with it and tried to stop the others or something, that would change the situation. But that hasn't transpired so far. If it did, I'd acknowledge that. Um, but the truth of the matter is, this is a situation that's out of control, and I think that it kind of graduates up. You know, I see it here in Sunderland. Sometimes I'm in the city centre. I see teenagers just throw their rubbish on the ground when there's a bin nearby. Some adults do as well, to be honest. Or they're mouthing off to security guards. And that can be replicated across the country, not just Sunderland. And another thing, it isn't just places that may have a stereotype for being deprived or tough. Um, this incident happened in Salisbury. Salisbury's a nice cathedral city. So it could be a housing estate in Liverpool or Sunderland or London, or it could be a nice genteel cathedral city. Clearly, the problem lies in youth culture. Clearly, the problem lies in the feral brats who think they could do what they want because there's no real consequences. They're not scared. That's what needs to change. They need to be scared of justice because I honestly think a lot of them know that their age saves them. So that has to change. It's all very well for the police talking tough, but what really matters is what happens in court. That some weak judge doesn't give them a tap on the wrist. I think the Sentencing Council has a lot to answer for because their whole attitude to youth crime is one of leniency. Um, so it needs to change. Now, I'm focusing on youth crime here because this is not to say that adults don't do this stuff as well, they do. But I think there is a particular problem with teenage thugs in this country. Um, and the difference with adults, at least the adult is more likely to serve a stiffer sentence. With young offenders, there's this idea, well, we can reform them when they're young, but after the fact, the crime has already happened. It's not like we can ward them away from crime if the crime has already happened. I'm talking about consequences after the fact. By all means, try to prevent it in the first place. Let's look at the root causes. Let's look at all sorts of factors. But I will absolutely forcefully defy anyone to say that this sort of crime should not result in consequences. Um, and I know there's no magic wand. Definitely a much, much tougher line is part of it. I think definitely threatening their parents with much tougher legal consequences is part of it. I think a change in culture as well. I think people who enable them need to be really challenged. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. It's not a fun subject, but and the thing is, I know I sound agitated, but I'm actually not angry, because I'm thinking clearly here. I mean, excuse me, I know it must be, I don't have hay fever, but sometimes I burn incense and it's a bit agitating. Yeah, I'm not saying that this sort of thing is going to change overnight, but by the way, I was watching some trailers of a science fiction film the other day. I'd never seen it before. It's called Class of 1984, made in 1982, and there were sequels, The Class of 1999, The Class of 1999 Part 2. Anyway, they were about this dystopian future where youth gangs are out of control. Um, we have a serious problem in this country. And I'm not saying it's a new thing. I mean, look at A Clockwork Orange. That film was made in 1971. The book was written in the mid 60s. And you know that was a very dark sort of project, a very dark story. Um, Stanley Kubrick pulled his own film because he was worried about the influence it would have on society. The thing about A Clockwork Orange, I'm not sure that it glorifies crime because half of the film is about punishing them. Um, People tend to forget the second half of A Clockwork Orange. They remember the first half, where Alex DeLarge and his gang are running wild, but they forget the second half. Anyway, my point is, I'm not saying that the youth crime is a new thing. Indeed, we can go back to Victorian slums in London. There was one called the Old Nickel. Some of those youth offenders were very vicious. The difference is in the past, the consequences were much harsher. Um, and I think accepting some, I do think the difference then was where you had the brazen sort of criminality. It tended to be in slums. It tended to be in the rougher areas. The difference today is there's no fear. They do it in public. They do it in city centres. That it's not confined to certain areas because they're so brazen and so confident. They'll do it anywhere. They basically feel the law can't touch them. So I hope right now they're shitting themselves. I hope they know that they're going to get a knock on the door, and I hope they are put away for a long time. I think for an attack like this, I'd give the ringleader 8 to 10 years. I'd give the others 3 to 5 years, depending on the level of involvement. Um, but definitely, it should be custodial sentences, even if that's in a young offenders institute. At least it should be behind bars. Um, I am so sick of those who enable these people. Um, they're just deluded, utterly deluded, if they think that the answer is we just need to sit them down and understand them. Understand what? What are they angry about? I mean, what sort of sickness would justify attacking a stranger in a wheelchair? It's not like they're fighting with each other, which might be explainable. They're attacking strangers. Um, of course, we can't forget the victims either. I mean, the two men involved in this, the two victims, particularly the guy in the wheelchair, I hope they're being given support. It didn't say the nature of his life-changing injuries, but I imagine if he's already in a wheelchair, I imagine they've done something to his leg. Um, well, it didn't say, but it's described as life-changing. For that reason, their sentences should be very stiff. It just the whole thing just we need to do something about it, and I think it's a graduation thing. I'll say a final thing. I think a big part of this lies in giving adults back power because for too long in this country, I mean, that's the difference. In the past, yes, you had youth gangs, you always had crime. But in the past, adults felt more confident to fight back because they knew they wouldn't be penalized for doing so. The perverse, crazy, outrageous situation we have today is if an adult defended themselves, they would be prosecuted. That's disgusting, perverse, wrong, outrageous, and it absolutely shames the sentencing council. That has to change. I think in a circumstance like that, the judge should be mandated to throw out the case, i.e., if an adult's being prosecuted for defending themselves from a teenage offender. My sister, when she was in her early 20s, her and her pregnant friend were assaulted by a group of teenage girls. And they were told, apparently, by the police that had they fought back, had they struck these teenagers, they would have been charged. This is insane. This is utterly insane. So I think adults need to be empowered. There needs to be power given back. Teachers need to be empowered. I mean, if you have two students fighting, a teacher should have the power to physically break them up. If you have a situation where a student is clearly being bullied horrendously, that teacher who witnesses it should have the power to forcefully intervene. Um, Frankly, there's people who talk about the rights of young people and protecting young people. Of course, that's important. Of course, I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently about the police strip searching young offenders. Now, I get the controversy, and I do think that needs to change. I think there needs to be adults in the room for obvious reasons, for the sensitive nature of it, especially since a lot of them haven't been charged. I do get the controversy over that, but we shouldn't conflate the need for, let's say, sensitive approaches with some of these things. Too empowering adults to act. So in the case of, let's say you have a 14 or 15-year-old who's suspected of carrying a knife, absolutely the police should have the power to check that. But they should have an independent adult, I guess, in the police station or something to that effect. But I think a lot of people are very, very naive because they seem to think that these teenage offenders are just harmless children. They're so, so, so naive and deluded. Some of the teenagers running around today are bloody dangerous. Uh, I'll wrap this up. Ah, it has to change. Adults need to be more empowered. Teenage thugs need to face real consequences.